was a cold, gray Saturday, the kind that blanketed Colchith in silence, the kind where the leafless branches swayed like skeletal fingers above the park's narrow path. On February 11th, 2023, 16-year-old Brianna Ghey stepped into that stillness, unaware she was walking straight into a nightmare. She was dressed casually, coat zipped, hands in her pockets, her long ginger hair catching the faint afternoon light. She had come to Colchith Linear Park, a quiet stretch of greenery nestled between housing estates and fields on the outskirts of Warrington, Cheshire, a place of calm, solitude, safety. At least it had been. But this visit wasn't spontaneous. She had been lured there, messaged and manipulated by two people she thought were her friends. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, both just 15 years old. As the minutes ticked past 2 p.m., no one in the nearby homes could hear what happened in the clearing. There were no screams that reached the road, no dog walkers nearby to witness the sudden burst of violence, just the quiet hum of wind and a crime so brutal, so senseless, it would ripple across the UK and beyond. Brianna was stabbed 28 times, her body left lying on the path as if discarded. Her final moments were marked by terror, betrayal, and unimaginable pain, inflicted not by adults or strangers, but by children. Later that afternoon, a couple out walking discovered her. The scene was surreal. Blood on the footpath, a girl motionless, no ID, just a phone lying nearby, silent. When police arrived, they didn't yet know who she was. They didn't yet understand the cruelty behind what they were seeing. But within hours, the image of Brianna Ghey, smiling, playful, known for her wit and her TikToks, would fill screens and news feeds across the country. And then came the truth. Not an accident. Not a moment of anger. But a premeditated murder, plotted in notebooks and group chats, a name scrawled on a kill list. And behind it all, two teenagers fueled by a cocktail of sadism, control, and hate. This wasn't just a murder, it was a message, and the world would soon be forced to listen. Before her name became a headline, before the hashtags and the vigils, Brianna Ghey was just Bri, a girl like so many others, navigating the messy middle ground between childhood and adulthood. But Brianna carried more than most, and she carried it with grace. Born in 2006 in Warrington, Cheshire, Brianna was described by those who knew her best as bright, funny, and defiantly individual. She wasn't afraid to be different. In fact, she leaned into it. Her long copper-red hair was always styled to perfection, her clothes chosen with care. And in a world that often demanded conformity, Brianna chose authenticity. She came out during early adolescence, and while the journey was far from easy, she found solace online. Through her growing TikTok following, where she posted under the name Ginger Puppy X. There, she shared stories, advice, and laughter with over 60,000 followers, many of whom were young trans people like her. To them, she wasn't just another content creator. She was a big sister, a guide, a voice, but life offline was harder. Brianna had been diagnosed with autism, ADHD, anxiety, and an eating disorder. These were not labels she wore like badges. They were realities she faced every day. The traditional school environment overwhelmed her. She struggled to cope with crowds, loud noises, and the lack of understanding from peers. Eventually, her family pulled her from mainstream education. She received one-to-one tutoring, which gave her space to breathe, but also left her isolated. Her world was smaller than most teens her age, fewer friends, more time online, and yet her personality was anything but small. She had a sharp wit and a kind heart. She loved makeup, fashion, anime. She adored her mom Esther and was incredibly close to her family. But despite the love at home, the outside world wasn't always so forgiving. Transphobia, bullying, misunderstanding, these weren't abstract concepts to Brianna. They were daily threats, words hurled in school corridors, looks on the street, comments online, And through it all, she kept smiling. She kept posting. She kept being Brianna. In her final weeks, she talked openly about her mental health. She was struggling, but no one, not her family, her teachers, her social workers, could have imagined how serious the danger truly was. No one could have guessed that two teens she thought were friends had been secretly writing about her death, that while she offered them kindness, they were drawing up plans. She was just 16, a girl with dreams, with a future. And as she walked into that park, she had no idea that someone had decided she didn't deserve one. 15 years old, school uniforms, bored expressions, walking through the same streets, riding the same buses. But behind the ordinary faces of Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, something far darker was brewing. And no one, not their families, not their teachers, not their peers, saw it coming. Scarlett had an intensity about her, smart, articulate, quiet but confident. She had been a high achiever in school until things started to shift in her teenage years. Her obsession with control became consuming. Beneath the surface, she was slipping into something sinister, a fascination with violence, with power, with domination. She began reading books about serial killers, torture manuals, sadism. Online, she found corners of the internet that didn't just tolerate these interests, they encouraged them. Scarlett was absorbing it all. And then there was Eddie, more socially awkward, less articulate, but intensely impressionable. He was known to struggle with his mental health and had a long history of being bullied. In Scarlett, he found someone who didn't mock him, someone who treated him like an equal. She was magnetic, and he followed her lead. They met at school and became inseparable. But theirs wasn't a typical friendship. It was a partnership in darkness. They created a shared fantasy world, one where they were no longer the victims of bullying or mental health struggles, but the ones in control. They started talking about violence, then planning it, drawing up lists, making notes, searching for weapons online. They didn't just think about killing, they enjoyed the idea of it. It made them feel powerful. Brianna's name appeared on a handwritten kill list alongside a few others. In Scarlett's notebook, she wrote detailed plans for poisoning people. In online chats, they talked about how they'd get away with it, who would be easiest to kill, and what they'd do afterward. At first glance, their messages seemed like fiction, the way children talk about horror movies or video games, but it wasn't pretend, not for Scarlett, and not for Eddie. What's more disturbing is that Brianna trusted them. She had no reason not to. They weren't strangers, they were people she thought of as friends, people she'd spent time with, messaged, shared jokes. She even defended Eddie in the past, when others had picked on him, and that's what made her the perfect target. She was kind, vulnerable, different, exactly the kind of person Scarlett and Eddie thought they could destroy without consequence. Behind closed doors they were preparing, studying maps, choosing the location, discussing the type of knife to use. They were methodical, eerily so. This wasn't a sudden outburst of rage. It was something far colder, premeditated, calculated, practiced. By the time Brianna agreed to meet them at Colchith Linear Park, their plan was already in motion. And every moment of that final walk, every word, every footstep, had been choreographed. No one suspected them, not then, because they didn't look like monsters. They looked like children. Long before the knife was ever raised, before a single drop of blood stained the earth at Colchith Linear Park, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe had already killed Brianna, in their minds. They had talked about it, planned it, practiced it. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was a blueprint. Inside Scarlett's bedroom, beneath the surface of a seemingly normal teen's life, were the trappings of a disturbed obsession. Notebooks filled with violent fantasies, drawings, diagrams, and worst of all, a kill list, with Brianna's name written clearly among others. Each name was annotated, considered, weighed up like pieces on a board. Brianna was labeled as easy, vulnerable, alone. Scarlett wasn't interested in revenge or emotion. What fascinated her was control, power. She idolized serial killers. She read about torture techniques and psychological manipulation. On the outside, she was quiet and intelligent, but online and in her private thoughts, she was feeding a darker part of herself, and she had found the perfect accomplice. Eddie was different, less methodical, less intelligent, but equally chilling in his own way. While Scarlett engineered the crime, Eddie seemed driven by anger and hate, especially towards Brianna's identity. It would later be revealed that Eddie held transphobic beliefs, and although prosecutors would stop short of labeling it the sole motive, his hatred fed the fire. Their chats were grotesque, dehumanizing, cold, clinical. They discussed how to kill without leaving evidence. They even filmed themselves in school toilets acting out the attack, practicing how they'd pin her down. Scarlett filmed Eddie in the act, directing him like a scene from a horror film, laughing, guiding. Then came the knife. It wasn't random. Scarlett had ordered it online, selecting a hunting blade, long, curved, designed to inflict deep damage. They discussed carrying it in Eddie's bag. They planned where to walk with Brianna, which paths had fewer people, which spots had no CCTV. They wanted it to be quiet, isolated, clean. Even their outfits were chosen carefully. Dark clothing, gloves. They packed a change of clothes to discard afterward. Scarlett even brought makeup remover, prepared to clean her face in case any of Brianna's blood got on her. It was the kind of meticulous planning that you'd expect from a seasoned adult criminal, not a pair of Year 10 students. In the hours leading up to the attack, Brianna had no idea. She thought she was meeting friends, people she could trust, people who saw her, really saw her, as more than just the trans girl people whispered about. Instead, she was walking into a trap designed with one purpose, to end her life and to enjoy it. Later, prosecutors would describe the murder as sadistic, planned, and cruel beyond belief. One of the most disturbing aspects was not just the violence, but the detachment. There was no panic, no remorse. Scarlett and Eddie cleaned up, disposed of evidence, and returned home. They had followed their plan to the letter, and Brianna, bright, hopeful, trusting Brianna, never stood a chance. The park had gone quiet again. Cold earth, still air. The only signs of what had happened were the blood-streaked path, Brianna's motionless body, and her phone, lying face down in the dirt, screen dark, waiting to be unlocked. By the time emergency services arrived, the two teenagers who had taken her life were already gone, walking away, hidden beneath layers of careful planning, disappearing back into the folds of suburbia. But the one thing they hadn't planned for was the modern world's obsession with watching. CCTV is everywhere. Shops, street corners, bus stops, even the backs of parked cars. And it didn't take long before detectives realized the killers had been seen, not just by cameras, but by the very digital breadcrumbs they'd scattered along the way. Within hours of discovering Brianna's body, police were combing through surveillance footage. They started with the local shops, cross-referencing timestamps with traffic cameras, footpath monitors, and public transportation logs. It was slow, methodical work, but it paid off. Footage showed Scarlett and Eddie walking with Brianna toward the park. Nothing unusual at first glance. 3 teens chatting, no sign of what was about to unfold. But then, an hour later, only 2 returned. Their pace quickened, their heads low, and Eddie, notably, had changed his clothes. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 came from Brianna's phone data. Forensic investigators pulled everything. Text messages, location tracking, recent calls, and there it was, a message inviting her to the park. The sender, one of her killers. Police moved quickly. They had suspicions, they had timelines, and now they had names. The arrests happened within 24 hours of the murder. two 15-year-olds, classmates, friends of the victim, taken into custody without incident. But what investigators discovered next was worse than anyone had imagined. In Eddie's bag, they found a hunting knife, the very weapon used in the killing. Blood was still on the blade. On their devices, detectives uncovered group chats, recorded videos, handwritten notes, and messages that outlined every step of their plan: when, where, how, and why. They had even discussed what to do after the murder, from cleaning up to lying if questioned. The evidence was overwhelming. Scarlett and Eddie had left behind a trail of code, texts, searches, cloud-stored files, the digital equivalent of fingerprints in fresh snow. And the more police dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a panic killing or a moment of rage. It was deliberate, sadistic, and proudly documented. By the time the public heard Brianna's name on the evening news, detectives were already holding her killers in separate cells, each refusing to speak. By the time the courtroom doors opened in December 2023, the nation was already watching. Newspapers called it one of the most disturbing child-on-child killings in decades. Vigils had been held, flowers laid, portraits of Brianna, all smile, all softness, now haunted the front pages. But behind the legal formality of Manchester Crown Court, something even more chilling was about to be laid bare: the truth. Not just of the killing, but of the minds behind it. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe sat silently in the dock, just 16 now, dressed neatly, no emotion, no flickers of remorse. Two children on trial for a murder so savage, so senseless, that even the most seasoned officers struggled to talk about it. And then the evidence began. CCTV footage played in the hushed courtroom. The jury watched the three teens walking toward the woods, the last known footage of Brianna alive. Minutes later, only two returned. Then came the messages, pages and pages of chat logs between Scarlett and Eddie. They spoke like characters from a horror script, discussing murder methods, sharing torture fantasies. Scarlett wrote about the thrill of hurting someone. Eddie suggested weapons. At one point, they joked about who would get first blood. The prosecution laid it out methodically. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't teenage chaos. This was premeditated, sadistic, and real. They had targeted Brianna because she was isolated, because she was trans, because, in Scarlett's words, she would be an easy kill, and because they wanted to know what it would feel like to end a life. The court heard how Scarlett had drawn up a kill list and had practiced the murder days before in a school bathroom, even filming Eddie acting out the stabbing. The knife used had been purchased weeks in advance. They had scouted the park, checked for CCTV, and packed spare clothes and makeup remover to clean up afterward. One of the most disturbing moments came when a voice note from Scarlett was played aloud, her tone calm, almost clinical, describing the need to feel what it's like to kill someone. Parents wept in the gallery. Even the jury struggled to meet her eyes. The defense tried to offer context: mental health issues, past trauma, vulnerability. They argued that both teens were deeply disturbed, possibly influenced by violent content online. But the prosecution didn't flinch. This was not madness, they said. It was malevolence. After weeks of evidence, on December 20th, the verdict came in. Guilty. Both of them. Unanimous. The judge did not shield the public from what he called one of the most callous and sadistic crimes in modern youth offending history. On February 2nd, 2024, the sentence was handed down. Scarlett Jenkinson, life with a minimum of 22 years. Eddie Ratcliffe, life with a minimum of 20 years. Two teenagers, now legally murderers. Their faces, once hidden, were revealed to the world. The masks were off, and still as they were led away, neither cried, neither spoke, neither looked back. But the world would never forget what they had done. Long before the blade touched Brianna's skin, the seeds of cruelty had already taken root. This wasn't just murder, it was a performance of power, a ritual of control. And when investigators began to peel back the layers of Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe's private world, they uncovered something far worse than teenage recklessness. They found sadism. Scarlett, in particular, was obsessed. Not in the way teens sometimes fixate on horror movies or morbid history. This was deeper, colder, a true fascination with suffering. Her diary, which police retrieved during the investigation, read like a blueprint for brutality. Pages were filled with disturbing entries, how it would feel to stab someone, how long a person might survive if cut in certain ways, what chemicals could be used to cause pain before death. She spoke about control, not chaos, not lashing out, but mastering another human being's will. She idolized serial killers, wrote essays on them, consumed content most people would instinctively recoil from. During the trial, psychologists described her as highly intelligent, emotionally detached, and deeply manipulative. And she wasn't hiding it, not from Eddie. He read the messages, he participated in the fantasies, he followed. But what set Eddie apart and chilled the courtroom even further was his hatred, specifically his hatred toward trans people. Brianna had always been open about her identity. She'd faced bullying for it, yes, but she didn't hide, and that made her a target. During the trial, prosecutors revealed that transphobia was part of the motive. Eddie had expressed it clearly in private messages, calling Brianna names, mocking her gender, referring to her as a thing instead of a girl. He saw her not as a person, but as a symbol, someone to be punished for being different. And Scarlett, she didn't just tolerate it, she weaponized it. In one disturbing message, she wrote that killing someone like Brianna would be easier because society already dehumanized her. That chilling line echoed across the courtroom like a cold slap of truth. They didn't just kill her, they believed the world would care less because of who she was. That's what made the murder so monstrous. It wasn't just planned, it was personal. The psychologist's reports offered no comfort. No remorse was found in either teen, no signs of regret. When asked if they felt bad for what they had done, neither could explain what bad meant in real terms. There were no tears, no breakdowns, just a cold acceptance that Brianna's life had been taken and that they had done it on purpose. Scarlett, especially, had shown signs of enjoying the attention during the trial. Observers noted the way she sat, poised, disconnected, almost theatrical. Some even wondered whether she saw the courtroom as the final act in her twisted performance, a way to be remembered, feared. But while they spoke of fantasies and fixations, the cost was real. Brianna, a vibrant, kind-hearted girl who just wanted to be accepted, was dead. Killed not just because she was vulnerable, but because she was different. Because someone decided that difference was enough to justify brutality. And in that moment, the crime became more than personal. It became a symbol of everything broken, in systems, in minds, and in the growing undercurrent of hate that hides in plain sight. The sentence came down hard, at least on paper. Scarlett Jenkinson, 16, would serve a minimum of 22 years. Eddie Ratcliffe, also 16, would serve a minimum of 20. Both were sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole only after decades behind bars. In the sterile stillness of the courtroom, the judge's words echoed with fury. This was a sadistic, premeditated, and deeply disturbing act of violence, carried out without pity, remorse, or hesitation. It sounded like justice. It looked like justice. But for those who loved Brianna, for her mother Esther, her family, her friends, and the thousands who had marched in silent vigils across the UK, it didn't feel like enough. How could it? How do you weigh 16 years of life stolen against a number printed on a sentence sheet? How do you measure justice when the person who should have been sitting her exams, making TikToks, learning to drive, and growing up, was now in the ground? When the verdict was read, Scarlett didn't flinch. Eddie stared blankly at the floor. There were no tears, no apology, no final moment of reflection, just silence. But outside the courtroom, the country wasn't silent. In the weeks following the sentencing, public response swelled, not only around the sentence itself, but around the wider issues the case had unearthed. People weren't just grieving Brianna. They were furious at a society that had failed to protect her. The question kept coming back. How did no one see this coming? Social services had been involved. Mental health workers, teachers, friends. Yet none had pieced together the full picture. The signs, the planning, the obsessions, the hatred had remained hidden just beneath the surface. A system designed to catch children in crisis had missed two who were not only in crisis, but planning a murder. And Brianna, already struggling with bullying, anxiety, gender identity, and isolation, had been left more or less on her own. So while the prison doors slammed shut behind Scarlett and Eddie, the conversation didn't end there. It was just beginning. Was justice served? Legally, yes. The maximum sentences for minors were handed down. But justice isn't only about punishment. It's about prevention, too. About recognizing the warning signs next time. About ensuring there isn't a next time. And for Brianna's family, the deepest pain wasn't just the crime. It was knowing that so many opportunities to save her were missed. Justice, in the end, may have arrived in the courtroom. But for the rest of us, the world that watched this unfold, the real verdict still hangs in the air. She never made it to 17. No prom dress, no college forms, no first love, no driving lessons, no quiet Sunday mornings with a cup of tea and the sun warming her face through the kitchen window. But Brianna Ghey's voice, silenced in that wooded path, did not die with her. In the days following her murder, a movement began, not in shouts but in candlelight, in vigils, in stillness. Across the UK, crowds gathered in town centers and parks, their faces glowing beneath flickering flames, some holding signs that read, "Say her name," Brianna's name, her truth, her dignity, her identity. In London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, strangers came together, many of them queer, trans, or young. People who had never known her in life but felt they knew her all the same. She was one of them. And her death struck a nerve, not just because she was young, but because she was targeted. Online, her TikTok account, Ginger Puppy X, became a memorial. Thousands flooded her old videos with messages of love. "You were so brave. You helped me come out. I wish you were still here." Her final posts, once playful and light, now carried a heaviness, a painful echo of what had been lost. But in the heartbreak, something extraordinary began to happen. Her mother, Esther, stepped forward, not just as a grieving parent, but as a voice of strength. A woman shattered by loss, yet unwilling to let her daughter's story be buried beneath the weight of court transcripts and headlines. Esther didn't retreat. She fought. She launched campaigns to hold social media companies accountable for the unfiltered, disturbing content both Scarlett and Eddie had accessed online. Spaces that fed their violence, radicalized their thinking, and taught them how to kill. She called for an age-verified internet, for stricter online safeguards, and for schools to better protect vulnerable children, especially those in the LGBTQ+ community. She gave interviews, appeared before Parliament, and through her own quiet devastation, became a symbol of resilience. And slowly, the country began to listen. In the wake of Brianna's death, conversations around gender identity, mental health, school bullying, and digital radicalization began surfacing in places they hadn't before, not just on TikTok or Twitter, but in Parliament, classrooms, and homes. Petitions were signed, new policies discussed. An inquest was announced to examine how so many red flags, with both the killers and Brianna herself, had gone unnoticed by the very systems designed to intervene. But through it all, one message remained clear. Brianna Ghey mattered. She was not just a victim. She was not defined by how she died. She was defined by how she lived, with honesty, kindness, and unapologetic courage. And in death, she gave voice to others who felt invisible. Others like her, others still here. It started as curiosity, then obsession, then murder. Long before Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe stepped into Colchith Linear Park, they had entered a different kind of wilderness, one without rules, boundaries, or adults, the internet. Not the public internet of search engines and school websites. The dark corners where fascination turns to fixation, where violence is not just glorified but gamified, where cruelty is currency. During the investigation, it became clear that the murder of Brianna Ghey didn't happen in a vacuum. It grew, slowly and methodically, within online spaces that most adults never see. Platforms like Discord, Reddit, and obscure encrypted forums, places filled with torture fantasies, misogyny, hate speech, and how-to guides for harm. Scarlett, with her calculating mind, soaked it up. She read about serial killers, participated in role-playing chats that blurred fiction and reality. She kept documents detailing torture techniques, diagrams, case studies, and pain thresholds. These weren't edgy horror interests. They were instructional. Eddie wasn't far behind. He gravitated toward transphobic content, hateful memes, posts, and conspiracy theories. Over time, his perception of people like Brianna began to warp. Not consciously, perhaps, but cumulatively. The algorithm fed his biases, reinforced them, and hardened them. The two found each other and began crafting their own echo chamber, a private world where their darkest thoughts weren't challenged. They were celebrated. By the time they started plotting Brianna's murder, it wasn't shocking to them. It felt justified. Inevitable. That's the terrifying power of unmoderated digital spaces, especially for children. The internet doesn't care about age or motive. It responds to attention. You watch one video on serial killers and you get 10 more. You read one post about violence and you're pulled deeper. Soon it doesn't feel extreme. It feels normal. And the algorithms, they never ask why. They only ask what next. After the trial, Brianna's mother, Esther, spoke directly to this threat. We monitor what our kids eat, what they wear, what time they come home. But we don't monitor what they see, not really. And what they see can poison them just as easily as anything they put in their body. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being honest. Scarlett and Eddie didn't just kill Brianna. They were shaped to do it, slowly, quietly, online. And the scariest part? They weren't alone. There are thousands of young people right now spiraling into similar online spaces, lonely, angry, isolated, finding not help but fuel. Every click a match, every scroll a whisper. You're right to feel this way. You're not alone. You should act on it. Brianna's murder made it impossible to ignore the truth. In the hands of vulnerable minds, the internet can become a weapon, not just of influence, but of destruction. And until we face that, Brianna won't be the last name we light candles for. The morning after Brianna was murdered, Esther Ghey woke up in a world that no longer made sense. There were no police statements that could prepare her, no phone call that could soften the words, "Your daughter has been found. She is gone." And 2 teenagers did it. Brianna wasn't just Esther's child. She was her everything. Her only daughter, her brightest light, the center of every plan, every worry, every late-night conversation. Esther had fought for her, through school systems, health appointments, bullying, through the quiet battles no one else saw. And now she was planning her funeral. But grief didn't break Esther. It transformed her. In the days following the murder, as news crews circled and hashtags surged, most parents would have retreated. Esther didn't. Instead, she stepped into the spotlight with a kind of quiet, devastating clarity. She didn't speak with rage. She didn't shout or demand. She grieved with purpose. Esther became a voice not just for Brianna, but for every child like her. She called out the institutions that had failed to see what was coming, the social services that missed the signs, the schools that hadn't protected her, the online spaces that had poisoned 2 children into killers. She met with MPs. She sat for interviews. Her words were calm but unmistakable. If the systems had worked the way they're meant to, my daughter would still be alive. And people listened. She campaigned for the online safety bill to be strengthened, pushing for age verification, better content moderation, and mental health protections for children exposed to radicalizing material. She spoke of the hidden spaces online where darkness festers, where children like Scarlett and Eddie are not warned or guided, but encouraged. She also began work on a well-being app in Brianna's memory, something real, something preventative, a tool for teenagers struggling like Brianna once had, a digital hand reaching out where there had once been only silence. All the while she grieved, in quiet, in public, in pieces. At a vigil in Warrington, Esther stood before 1,000 candles, her voice trembling but unbroken. She didn't ask for pity, she asked for change. She asked the crowd to remember Brianna not as a victim but as a beacon, a girl who lived with honesty and softness in a world that too often punishes both. She often spoke about Brianna's compassion, how she stood up for others even when no one else did, how she could sense pain in others because she had carried it herself. That, Esther said, was what the world needed more of: compassion, accountability, kindness. She wore a pink rose to every public appearance, Brianna's favorite, a symbol not of death, but of life, bright, beautiful, brief. Esther never set out to be an activist. She just wanted to be a mom. But in losing her daughter, she became something more, a protector of every other child still walking that narrow line between acceptance and erasure. And though she'll never again hear Brianna's laugh echoing down the stairs, her voice now echoes across the country. Because Esther Ghey didn't let her daughter's story end in a courtroom. She lit a fire with it, and the world is still warming its hands. Brianna didn't get to grow up. She didn't get to see what the world could become. But the world is changing because of her. In the time since her life was so cruelly taken, something rare has happened. Her story has refused to fade. It hasn't been buried beneath the noise of the next tragedy. It hasn't been reduced to headlines or courtroom sound bites. Instead, it's grown into conversations, into reforms, into action. Across the UK, schools have started reviewing how they support transgender and neurodivergent students. Teachers, often unequipped, are asking better questions. Who is vulnerable? Who is being heard? And who isn't? Mental health services are being challenged too, to stop waiting for children to break before offering help. To recognize that online danger doesn't always come from strangers. It can grow between friends in silence. The Online Safety Act, once stuck in political red tape, began gathering speed after Brianna's name entered the national conscience. Lawmakers could no longer ignore the role unmoderated content plays in shaping young minds. Brianna made the crisis real. There are now memorials in her name, in Warrington, in Colchester, and in the digital world she once loved. Thousands of people, many of them young, queer, isolated, just like she once felt, have found each other through her story. They march not just in grief, but in unity. Candles in one hand, signs in the other. Trans rights are human rights. Justice for Brianna, never again. And her mother Esther hasn't stopped. Her campaign continues, pushing for better online protections, for early intervention in mental health, for compassion in classrooms and safety in streets. But perhaps Brianna's greatest legacy is not in what she changed, but in how she lived. She was kind, honest, funny, vulnerable. She chose truth in a world that made it dangerous. She didn't hide. She tried every day to just be herself completely. And that is what makes her death so unbearable. But also what makes her memory so powerful. Because every time a child finds the courage to say who they are, to wear what they want, to speak up, to reach out, Brianna is there. Every time someone intervenes in cruelty, or questions a system, or challenges hate, Brianna is there. Every time the world becomes a little safer, a little softer, a little more honest, she is there. She did not get a full life, but she gave something to ours, not just a tragedy, a truth. And though the path in Colchester Linear Park still exists, quiet, wooded, unchanged, it will never be just a path again, and where it began to reckon with what it had become. She is gone, but her name is not. Her voice lives on.